Well, dear President Shatman, dear President Flückiger, dear Vice Presidents, dear Deans, dear Vice Deans, dear colleagues, dear guests, I'd like to welcome you all to this presentation of our new National Center of Competence in Research, NCCR involving language. We were hoping for a festive event, a launch event in real space, and kept postponing again and again, and eventually we gave up and now go fully digital. Glad you were able to join us here. And now, together with co-director Annelies Giraud and Deputy Director Klaus Zuberbühler, I want to give you a tour of the NCCR, of what we are going to do here. But before doing so, I would like to give the floor to first Mikhail Shatman, President of the University of Zurich. Please, Mikhail.
Thank you, Balthasar. Monsieur le Recteur de l'Université de Genève, cher Yves, chers collègues des universités de Genève, Neuchâtel, Lausanne, Fribourg, EPFL et IDIA, sehr geehrte Kolleginnen und Kollegen der Universitäten Zürich, Basel und der ETH, chère Madame la Professeure Giraud, sehr geehrter Herr Professor Bickel, sehr geehrter Herr Professor Zuberbühler, ladies and gentlemen, also from my side, a warm welcome to all of you from wherever you may be participating today. As president of the University of Zurich, I'm very proud to see the universities of Geneva and Zurich being and acting as co-leading houses of this new National Center of Competence in Research, Evolving Language. That we have been chosen as home institutions is an honor and holds a great potential for strategic opportunities. First of all, the new NCCR offers a unique potential for interdisciplinary exchange and collaboration. This new center of competence brings together scientists from many different subject areas, ranging from anthropology to linguistics and ecology, thus bridging the gap between science and the humanities. Actually, in your proposal, you list a mere 13 disciplines united in this NCCR. This multidisciplinary approach contributes substantially to promoting diversity in research, which is a key goal of the University of Zurich and I presume all participants. What is more, the NCCR Evolving Language is a perfect example of successful collaboration between the most relevant stakeholders in Switzerland as well as abroad, and I'm sure it will contribute to strengthening the mutual ties between these institutions even further. The NCCR Evolving Language not only crosses boundaries between disciplines, but also between researchers from many different language backgrounds. You are well set for a brilliant start. I'm very curious to learn if you ever will be able to know what you are going to say before you actually spoke out the words. Much more, I'm interested to learn about the dynamic structure of language, the underlying biological mechanisms that actually facilitate us to use language, and the social cognitive mechanisms enabling linguistic communication. We may even promote largely a next research frontier to be in phylogenies. Phylogenies are very important for viruses, as most of you know, but also for biodiversity, which is my domain of interest, and I learned also in language, amongst many others. Personally, I hope you develop a new capacity in human communication, allowing us to predict how humans communicate with Zoom, Teams, and Skype in absence of physical presence. Ladies and gentlemen, I wish the leadership of the NCCR Evolving Language and all participants a great start. I'm very much looking forward to individual and collective scientific achievements of this flagship project. It is with pride that the University of Geneva and the University of Zurich host this network of excellence. Our full support is granted, and I'm proud that you took on the challenge and responsibility to lead this project. Thank you very much for your attention.
Thank you very much, Mikhail Shatman, for these very kind wishes and words. I would like to now give the floor to Yves Flückiger, President of the Université de Genève, please.
Thank you very much, dear President of the University of Zurich, dear Michael. Sehr geehrter Herr Professeur Mikhail, chère Annelise, chers collègues de l'Université de Genève et des universités suisses, ladies and gentlemen, as president of the University of Geneva, I am very proud and very pleased to take part in this event, and proud to note also that this strategic partnership we have concluded with the University of Zurich has been so fruitful in leading to the award of this National Center of Competence in Research Evolving Language. We can be proud of this first achievement, and I'm very much looking forward to all the other achievements that will mark this NCCR. We have many reasons to celebrate this success and those to come. First of all, because this NCCR, which started on 1st of June 2020, is the first center of this magnitude to focus on language and its evolution. Secondly, with this transdisciplinary approach, the NCCR breaks down disciplinary barriers and brings a new perspective to research. Never before have the worlds of humanities and language sciences and natural sciences and mathematics been so close, and yet they bring unexpected new perspectives that promise many new discoveries. But bringing the disciplines closer together is nothing without a network of experienced researchers. As co-leading houses, the universities of Zurich and Geneva have succeeded in bringing together researchers from all over Switzerland, illustrating the scientific quality of the country and the curiosity to discover new perspectives together. An interdisciplinary approach and universities that cross linguistic borders, what better in a way to present the diversity and richness of Switzerland. At the level of University of Geneva, 4 faculties are involved: medicine with neurosciences, humanities with computational linguistics, psychology and educational sciences, as well as translation and interpretation. University of Geneva involvement in this NCCR reinforces its leading role in the field of neurosciences and artificial intelligence, modeling the language processing system in the human brain and human-machine interaction are at the heart of Geneva research. Even if the news is now public, I'm particularly happy to confirm that the well-known Geneva Foundation has awarded as a real Christmas gift a substantial donation to acquire 2 major pieces of equipment, notably a magnetoencephalography, which is the only equipment of this kind in Switzerland. It will be made available to all NCCR researchers and will enable important scientific advances to be made. There are many different outcomes to be achieved, and among them, let me mention the following: to understand first language pathologies and to set up digital diagnostics and neuroengineering treatment strategies, particularly in the case of dyslexia and aphasia. Human-computer interaction, evolution of communication with the arrival of new technologies, ethical implication of these new treatments and social paradigms. Before concluding, I would like to thank all my colleagues from the University of Geneva and University of Zurich, in particular Professor Giraud and Mikhail, and all their teams who worked very hard to obtain this NCCR, and who will now put all their energy and enthusiasm into producing results that will constitute major milestones for science and society. Ladies and gentlemen, I hope this event will be very stimulating and enriching for you. In fact, I know it will be, and I wish you all the best for your projects within the NCCR Evolving Language. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, President Flückiger, for these kind wishes and nice words. So then we want to jump right in. And as I said, co-director Annelise Giraud, Deputy Director Claude Zuberwiller, and myself will give you a tour of the NCCR. And the start will be done by Annelise Giraud, and I'm now handing her not only the floor, but also the command over the screen.
Okay, I was there explaining, of course, that language is a property of our species, as you all know. And language actually in our, busy, complex Western lives matters for about every aspect of our life. And it matters socially, of course. I mean, there won't be any social construct without language for sharing our thoughts. And consequently, and I don't have control anymore. I don't know why. So Balthazar, just take over the,
okay.
Yeah. It matters individually, as it is particularly difficult to take part in these complex societies I was talking about if you have a language disorder or no language at all. Next. So language is really the DNA of our societies, and it's not just a simple metaphor. It's really, the code, pretty much like the DNA codes for the biological entities that we are. Language codes for the larger, coherent, and adapted social entities. And of course, mutations of language paradigms will induce mutations of social functioning. Next, Balthazar, you have to do it, yeah. So literally, as we speak, we are watching immense mutations in language evolution. Mutations in communication, the new media that every one of us use every day are creating new phenomena. The old paradigm where one person was talking to another or many others, as I'm doing now, is now a bit over. Now we have crowds talking to crowds, and this is a new paradigm that we don't know how to control, how to deal with, which can lead to what we call here amorphous social phenomena, where there is no one single spokesperson to negotiate with, like what happened with les Gilets jaunes 2 years ago. Next. So we're also watching these days mutations in language cognition. We're about to decode imagined speech directly from neural activity. We currently do it for good, or what we believe to be ethical purposes, mainly to treat patients who have lost language function. But maybe one of these days it's going to be used also for less ethical purposes, for business only, for politics, for whatever. And we need to be on top of such developments. And the idea of direct brain-to-brain communication is no longer science fiction. And if that was possible, language evolution would take a completely new turn that we need to anticipate. Next. Well, finally, also witnessing mutations in social identity. So far, I mean, for the last 300,000 years or so, language was there to demark many societies. And this actually has completely changed with globalization. And now only a few languages are subsuming gigantic societies, which actually make these societies in need of retrieving some identities, for instance, through religion, with all the possible conflicts that it entails. This is also something serious that we need to consider. Next. So these are the facts that actually are the grounds for building this NCCR, but more practically, the challenges we're up to are the following. What do these mutations in language evolution mean for the structure of our societies? What do they mean for us as human beings, as species? And how do they relate or prolong past evolution? And at this point, I will let Balthazar take over the screen to explain more in depth that only an evolutionary approach can allow us to take these challenges. Balthazar, back to you.
Thank you, Annelies. So our core idea is that we want to approach language as a natural phenomenon, that is, as a property of us as a species among thousands of other species. Now, properties like these and any other such property, for these properties, it's clear that, as famous evolutionary biologist Dobzhansky put it, nothing really makes sense except in the light of evolution. And if you look at language, you discover that there are certain traits, certain properties of language, certain components that have indeed a deep evolutionary history, and understanding this history allows us to better understand these phenomena. Here is a simple example. We have ways of putting together two simple commands, like in this famous 50s slogan of duck and cover. And this has parallels and perhaps even shared evolutionary precursors in call combinations of other animals, of other primates, other mammals, and yes, even birds. But human language can do so much more than stringing together two commands or two calls. We can create exceedingly complex structures in our sentences, far more complex than anything you find in the animal kingdom. We want to find out what happened, when did it happen, and why did it happen? And we also want to look into the future. We want to understand how our faculty of language might evolve yet further in the future. Looking at, for example, at the possibilities that Annelies Giraud just mentioned about the neuroengineering possibilities that might at some point allow us to communicate sentence structures simultaneously and directly between brains. We have no idea what this entails at present for the way we function, for the way we communicate. Because, for instance, it would remove the constraint on temporal order that is currently imposed by our present communication channels in speech and gesture. It's a completely new paradigm, and we want to understand what this might entail in the future. Now I talked about sentence structure, and this is clearly a very fundamental and important part of language that we certainly will address as a core issue in our NCCR, but there are many other components that are just as important in language and that we want to understand in terms of their evolutionary background and the potential for evolution in the future. There's our sound systems. Where do our sound systems come from? Do they have evolutionary precursors in other animals? Where do they develop? How are they represented in the brain? We want to understand how language treats meaning, how it represents meaning, how it represents events and reference and so on. Where does this come from evolutionary and where does it go? We want to understand why it is possible that we understand what someone means far above and beyond what someone says. And this inferential capacity, where did it come from evolutionarily? What's its background in the neurobiology of the brain, and where does it go when we interact with artificial systems, for example? We want to understand turn taking. It's amazingly rapid how we can take turns as humans when we talk to each other. Within milliseconds, we can give answers. We want to understand when this capacity emerged in our evolutionary history and what it means when we communicate, for instance, not with other humans, but with machines, as we do more and more. We want to understand the dynamics of language. Why is it that languages constantly diversify over time and space? How is this process constrained? What's its similarity with biodiversity? How does it interact with ecological constraints? How does it compare to other animal communication systems? We want to understand all these issues. And last, but certainly not least at all, learning. Humans are amazing. An infant will learn whatever language is in her or his environment. Why? Where does this amazing adaptivity and flexibility of the infant brain come from? What are there parallels in the animal kingdom? We barely don't know. And these are the questions that we want to address. Now, it's quite clear that you cannot even begin to answer any of the questions I just posed from one single discipline. We need a fully integrated transdisciplinary approach, which brings together experts on language from linguistics, from computer science and mathematics of many different kinds, from behavioral biology, from neuroscience, psychology, medicine, and also, importantly, philosophy and ethics. And this is what we decided would be needed in order to tackle the problem that we defined for ourselves, the history and the future of language. And we brought together this team of 40 principal investigators who are involved in this endeavor and join us to really make progress in answering all these questions. They come from many different institutions. We have a total of 9 institutions all over Switzerland. And in the chart here, the edges have a width proportional to the number of PIs who collaborate on a work package, who co-supervise the postdocs and the PhD students working on this. So this tightly integrates everybody with everybody in our endeavor. Now, in terms of its intellectual structure, we have basically 3 themes. One on the dynamic structures with projects on grammar, on the diversification process, and on the computational models that we can propose now to understand language better. We have a theme on biological substrates, that is essentially the brain apparatus that underlies these, with projects on reception and production, and importantly on variability across individuals. And the third theme, the third axis, is on the social cognition of language, like its role for forming social structures, for keeping up cooperation between individuals, and last but far from least, digitization challenges that disrupt the social fabric that language grew up in. Now, all these projects are heavily interwoven with each other, and here the shading of the edges again represent the amount of collaboration between PIs on specific work packages and in supervision projects. Now, in addition, the whole series of projects is kept together by what we call transversal task forces. For instance, we have a transversal task force on conceptual engineering led by philosophers that will help us clarify fundamental notions like meaning or intention or reference that are fundamental to pretty much all of these projects, and keep us think about this, clarify our conceptual underpinnings. We have a task force on ethics, tackling, for example, the gigantic ethical challenges that are posed by neuroengineering possibilities that are currently being developed and become ever more widespread. We have a task force on data science with experts from data engineering to statistics to machine learning who help us get the projects going, because all our projects are pretty heavy on computational and quantitative machine learning and statistical methodologies. And finally, the same is also true for technology, because in many areas we need new technology to probe patterns in the brain or to explore cognitive and communicative behavior in animals. And at this point, I would like to hand over to Klaus Zuberbühler. Let me see whether this works now. We had this technical problem, but it doesn't. So Klaus, I will just click whenever you give me a sign.
Okay, so thanks, Balthasar. So I just want to start by saying that it was a real privilege to put together this NCCR proposal. Certainly an absolute highlight of my career, learning how much expertise and just, wonderful ways of doing research there is in this country. And so as Balthasar said, we've organized our research along 3 themes. If you could move to the first theme, please. That's called dynamic structures. This is really about language itself, sort of how language is structured, its dynamics, how these structures interact also with technologies and new means of communication that have been highlighted by Annelies and Balthasar also. So here we've got 3 projects, each containing a certain number of work packages. The first one is on grammar. So this is really about the basic mechanisms that structure communicative expressions. And importantly, as already pointed out before, we're not just interested in humans, we're also interested in other species, notably primates, but also other animals. How do they communicate? What do they already know? And what can they do in terms of combining signals into larger units? Then the second project is called Diversification. So here, this is really also how this diversity that we can document, how does it change and diversify over time and space? And here really we're interested also in the whole genetics of language, the underlying genetic structure that is responsible for the development of this diversity, but also the ecology and geographical environment that leads to diversification. Then the third project in this first theme is called computation. So this is really to develop models of language, but what's special here is we want biologically plausible models that are grounded in neurobiology, that are linked with reality, so that we can really get a full understanding of what language is really all about. Then we've got a second theme. So this one is really sort of about the biology, the biological substrates of language. So here it's clearly about the brain. The brain is the organ of the language faculty. And without understanding the brain, we won't understand language ever. So the focus here is on especially two parts, the prefrontal cortex, but then also the posterior temporal area, especially on the left-hand side, which everyone knows are heavily involved in language processing. So here again, three different projects. The first one is what we call the production project. So humans are in this part probably really unique. We're the only species, as far as we know, that have anything that we could call speech. So understanding the neural basis of speech planning, all the way from articulation to syntax is at stake here. We would also like to understand the ontogeny of the apparatus, of the speech apparatus, how this emerges throughout the development in our species. Then the second one is kind of the other side of communication, reception. So here the basic problem is, how do we ever understand this continuous stream of acoustic information and break it down into the meaningful units so that we understand what people are trying to tell us? So how do we chunk this speech stream into the linguistic elements and encode these elements into our minds? Then the third and final one here is called variability. So we all know there's differences in how people manage with their language production. There's also a whole bunch of pathologies that are known and need to be understood. A lot of these do have biological reasons, and to understand this is also something that we believe is heavily important also for our society, for our children, to make sure we move forward. So that brings me to the third theme. This is about cognition, the underlying cognition of language. So here the focus is heavily also on evolution. So we are primates, biologically speaking. Our minds are primate minds that have a long and deep evolutionary history. And we'd like to understand how this particular primate mind that we've got, how that became capable of language at some point. So here again, three projects. The first one is what we call the Sociality Project. So what we're interested here is really largely the ontogeny, the development of communicative competence, again, in different species, not just in humans, also in our closest relatives, the non-human primates and other species. Then the second one we call cooperation. So here, many researchers have already realized that humans are really special in terms of their cooperative capacities. We're hyper-cooperative, and there's been a suspicion or a hypothesis that this hyper-cooperativity is really the foundation of the language apparatus. So to understand the evolution and nature of our cooperative abilities and those of, for example, non-human primates will hopefully help us understand what's required to develop linguistic capacities. Then the third and final one is really in a sense about the future of language. So Balthasar and Anis have already pointed out the various the various changes that go on right now in our societies. And so what we really want to understand is what impact will these changes in technology, artificial intelligence, and so forth have on our linguistic intuitions, on our mental representations about the world, but also simply on how we speak. So that's a short and brief summary. I wish I could speak more. We don't have much time. Maybe in the question and answer session, we're happy to get into this more deeply. But just to finish this off with a few slides on the organization of our NCCR. So this is sort of a typical structure where we get funding from the federal government directly, matched by the two home institutions, Zurich and Geneve, roughly equally. The whole project is administered through the Swiss National Science Foundation. So this is a standard model. Then also two more slides one more slide on our partners. So we try and ground our research also in the private sector. In for example, with Google, as you can see, but then also there is for example, the Hans Wilsdorf Foundation, which President Flückiger has already mentioned, who generously donated an MEG installation at Geneva. This will also be super important especially for theme 2. So very grateful for that. And then finally, the next slide will show you our administrative structure. So the whole NCCR is headed by an administrative headquarter team led by Elisa and Manuel. And then we've got Delphine, Sarah, Caroline, Fabienne, Françoise, and Emily, who are charged with specific tasks such as communication, education, but then obviously also finances and the administration at the home institution. So these are really a wonderful team. We're very lucky to have these people, and it's been great to work with them so far. Then the second last slide shows you the general structure that we have set up here to run this research conglomerate. So we've got the steering committee, obviously consisting of the director, but then also delegates from the two home institutions from Zurich and Geneva. But then we also have representatives from the TTF, from the projects, from the administration team, and then obviously from the scientific staff. So that brings me to the end and final slide. We've got a website that's up and running as of today. We checked, there shouldn't be too many glitches so far. We also have a Twitter feed if you'd like to follow us on that. And that brings me to the end. I'm gonna hand over to Manuel now, who will be happy to lead the discussion in case you have questions. Thank you very much.